Ukraine just unveiled a brand new mega missile with a staggering 1,000 kilometer, 621 mile range. Meet the Moscow Killer, or to give its official title, the Long Neptune, the latest and greatest innovation of the Ukrainian military, and a game-changing weapon that opens up a vast swathe of new targets for Kyiv and could quite literally send shockwaves all the way to the Kremlin itself. Those who have been following the conflict in Ukraine closely will know that this is not the first time that the Long Neptune has surfaced. It's been in the works for quite a while. In fact, it was back towards the end of 2023 that initial reports first emerged, suggesting that Ukraine was looking into ways to extend the range of its R-360 Neptune cruise missiles. The original Neptune missiles were first unveiled in 2015 at the Arms and Security International Exhibition in Kyiv. They were designed by Kyiv's Luch Design Bureau, which took inspiration from the old Soviet-era Kh-35 anti-ship missiles. Just like Kh-35s, Neptunes were originally intended for damaging and destroying naval vessels, and they were tested on numerous occasions over the course of the late 2010s, before eventually entering service with the Ukrainian Navy in 2021. Then the war started, and Neptunes were quickly put to the test in real-world combat scenarios, and they proved highly effective. Mere weeks into the war, the first reports emerged of Ukrainian forces using Neptunes to deal major damage to Russian targets, like on April 3, 2022, when a Neptune struck the Russian frigate Admiral Essen, or later that month on April 13, when two Neptunes blasted the Russian cruiser Moskva, triggering a large fire and explosion of an onboard ammunition store. There have been numerous other instances since then of Neptune successfully striking Russian naval targets. And in 2023, Ukraine changed the game. It made some major modifications to the Neptune's design, developing a new guidance system and creating a brand new Neptune variant that was suitable for land-based attacks. The new land attack Neptunes have since been used to blow up Russian air defense systems, radars, and other high-value targets, dealing massive amounts of damage to the Kremlin's war machine. But there's always been one issue holding the Neptune back: its range. Its initial iteration had a maximum range of around 190 miles or 300 kilometers, which is in line with other leading missiles from around the world, like the United States' iconic ATACMS. 190 miles isn't exactly a short distance, and it gives Kyiv a lot of viable, valuable Russian targets to aim at. However, because Russia is such a vast country, the Kremlin knows it can easily move its more valuable assets deeper inland to keep them safe from Ukrainian missile strikes. When planning the construction of new pieces of infrastructure too, like drone factories and military production plants, Moscow can simply place them far enough from the border so Ukraine's forces can't hit them. But that's all about to change, because since late 2023, Kyiv has been hard at work on the next evolution of the Neptune, a new and improved missile with a far greater range than the original. Ukraine kept most of the details under wraps as time went by, only releasing minor updates and tidbits of information here and there. In December 2023, for example, Lieutenant General Ivan Havrilyuk, who was the first Deputy Defense Minister of Ukraine at the time, stated, "Now work is underway to create the so-called long-range Neptune. This involves a new modification of the missile for the Neptune complex. Active work is also being carried out in collaboration with the Ministry of Strategic Industries to strengthen the air defense system. At the moment, we cannot talk about it in detail." News of the project was scarce throughout 2024, and some even wondered if Long Neptunes would ever be seen on the battlefields of Ukraine. However, in March of this year, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy took to Telegram to announce that the Long Neptune project was not only complete, but that the missile had already been used in combat. The Long Neptune has been tested and successfully used in combat. A new Ukrainian missile, an accurate strike. Its range is 1,000 kilometers. I am grateful to our Ukrainian developers, manufacturers, and military. We continue to work to ensure Ukrainian security. Now, Ukraine has gone one step further and officially unveiled the Long Neptune in all its glory. The missile featured in a recent video uploaded to the Ukrainian Instagram channel Zobraya, which translates to weapons. The video, published on Ukraine's Independence Day, August 24, shows various examples of modern Ukrainian armaments interspersed with images of Ukrainian people in traditional cultural outfits and settings. At one stage, what can be seen is quite clearly a longer, enhanced version of the original R-360 Neptune missile, with military analysts at Defense Express confirming that this must be the Long Neptune itself. The video doesn't linger on the Long Neptune or go into any detail about its size, range or capacities, but experts are already hard at work analysing the images to learn all they can. Preliminary estimates suggest that the length is over 6 meters or more than 19 feet, not including the booster, which would make the Long Neptune more than 1.5 meters, 5 feet longer than the original. The central part of the missile's body is also thicker than before, rising to about 50 centimeters, 20 inches, compared to the original's 38 centimeters or 15 inches. It's likely that this extra bulk is needed to store the additional fuel the Long Neptune needs to travel further distances and strike targets potentially hundreds of miles from its launch point. The Long Neptune's wings and tail are also larger than the original, which should help to compensate for its greater takeoff weight. It's not yet known exactly how heavy it is, nor are there any details on the size of its warhead, though the original Neptune carries a warhead weighing 150 kilograms or 330 pounds. But without doubt, the most important technical specification regarding the Long Neptune is its range. Prior to this point, Ukraine's best long-range missiles included the aforementioned ATACMS with their 190-mile range, and Storm Shadows provided by France and the United Kingdom, which have a maximum range of around 155 miles or 250 kilometers. That was enough to target the likes of command posts, oil refineries and airfields across the border into Russia, but nowhere near enough to reach targets further inland, in areas around Moscow, for example. A Long Neptune can go around 4 times further than a Storm Shadow, dramatically extending Ukraine's strike capabilities. Indeed, looking at the maps of the region, it's clear just how far these new missiles are able to reach, extending not just to Moscow, but far beyond, with other cities like Volgograd and Nizhny Novgorod, Russia's 6th biggest city, coming into range. Here's why this matters so much for Ukraine. Firstly, as mentioned earlier, it unlocks a myriad of new targets. All of a sudden, numerous Russian factories, refineries, pipelines, railway tracks, logistic hubs, airfields and command posts that were once relatively safe are now under threat from a major missile attack. And as seen time and time again over the course of the war so far, Ukraine is remarkably effective when it comes to picking the most high-value military targets and taking them out. From the iconic Operation Spiderweb attack to less talked about but still significant strikes on oil refineries, military factories and other targets, Ukraine's armed forces have repeatedly and consistently identified key locations on Russian soil and executed plans against them, turning billions of dollars of Russian military infrastructure into burning piles of rubble. With every day that passes, more of these attacks take place. Just recently, on August 26, for example, Ukrainian drones struck Russian railway infrastructure in the occupied Crimean Peninsula, with a direct hit on an important substation. Some of Ukraine's strikes are small, others much larger, but all take a toll on the Kremlin's war machine. Reuters recently reported, for instance, that Ukraine's strikes on 10 Russian oil refineries have disrupted at least 17% of the country's oil refining capacities, which equates to more than 1 million barrels of oil a day. Ukraine sources have also estimated that its attacks have cost Russia around 4% of its entire gross domestic product, GDP, which is more than $74 billion. And it's important to note that most of Ukraine's deep strike attacks, like Operation Spiderweb, were carried out with drones alone. Quite cheap and basic drones for the most part. They're capable of dealing a lot of damage, but drones don't carry the same kinds of massive warheads or deal the same sort of devastation as missile strikes, nor can they destroy heavily armoured or fortified targets like bunkers and reinforced bases the same way missiles can. So now, just imagine how much more damage Ukraine's forces could deal using their Long Neptune missiles. Imagine if, when striking an airfield or production plant 500 miles beyond the border, instead of just launching a swarm of simple drones, Ukraine could also fire a couple of Long Neptunes too. It's no exaggeration to suggest that the impact of this could be catastrophic from the Kremlin's perspective. And don't forget that Russia is already seriously struggling. Its casualties have now far surpassed the million mark, and it's seen thousands upon thousands of tanks, armoured vehicles, radar stations, artillery systems, air defences, jets, bombers, and other pieces of military hardware wiped off the map by Ukraine. Its economy is paying the price, with a major labour crisis, rising interest rates, an impending recession, and a shrinking national wealth fund. And every time Ukraine blows up another fuel depot, substation, or other high-value target, the situation simply gets worse for Russia, which is rapidly running out of resources, fighting an utterly unsustainable war. That war has been in something of a stalemate state for quite some time now, with Russia making marginal gains here and there before Ukraine pushes them back and they have to start all over. Indeed, statistics show that Russia today actually controls far less land in Ukraine than it did during the early months of the invasion, which shows how well the Ukrainians have managed to dig in and defend their territory. Stats also reveal that even though the Kremlin has gained a bit more ground than usual during its much vaunted summer offensive, estimates suggest it would take literally decades or even close to a century for Russia to conquer Ukraine in its entirety. In short, the stalemate situation is set to continue for quite some time, but the addition of Long Neptunes to Ukraine's arsenal could change all that. Suddenly, it's possible that the tide might turn in Kyiv's favour, as it could now launch more devastating, destructive, and costly attacks on Russia than ever before. It might even be able to strike targets in and around the Russian capital, bringing the war, in a very real sense, right to Vladimir Putin's doorstep. That could have far-reaching consequences for the Russian president, who is already facing the threat of a possible coup and constantly struggling to save face in front of his people, using lies and propaganda to somehow justify a war that's crippled his country and left millions of its citizens mourning the loss of their loved ones. The national mood across Russia is already reaching all-time low levels, with average citizens having to pay up to twice as much for everyday essentials. If they started seeing not just Ukrainian drones, but massive long-range missiles flying overhead and hitting military factories and facilities all around them, even more Russians would surely start to ask the questions of why this costly, nonsensical war ever began, and when, if ever, will it finally end. Now, another massive benefit of the Long Neptune missile is the fact that this is a domestic product. It's Ukrainian made, and that means Kyiv is in control of how many missiles it makes, and more importantly, how it uses them. That puts the Long Neptune in stark contrast to most of the other long-range missiles at Ukraine's disposal, which were largely supplied by NATO allies like the US and France. Those allies don't just supply the missiles, they also get to dictate how Ukraine can use them. For example, despite sending several batches of ATACMS to Kyiv, the US expressly prohibited Ukraine's army from using those missiles against targets on Russian soil for a very long time. It imposed strict rules and restrictions, so while Russia fired dozens of missiles and hundreds of drones into Ukraine on a nightly basis, blowing up everything from hospitals to schools to residential buildings, Ukraine was not allowed to fire back, even against military infrastructure. That restriction has since been adjusted, but not fully lifted. The use of ATACMS and other NATO-supplied long-range weapons is still subject to a review mechanism that allows US and allied officials to block strikes on Russian territory. In other words, Ukraine's freedom to use those systems remains conditional, and NATO leaders could always change or tighten the rules. Kyiv also can't necessarily rely on a steady and consistent supply of NATO missiles. It simply has to take what it gets, and while allies like the US, UK and others have been very generous in sending arms to Kyiv, delays and disruptions sometimes occur. There was a brief but notable moment when the US temporarily ceased aid to Kyiv, for example, and there have been dramas and dilemmas along Ukraine's other allies. Germany, for example, has struggled and continues to struggle with an ongoing issue about whether or not it should send long-range Taurus missiles to Kyiv. Due in part to these kinds of issues, Ukrainian military commanders have, on numerous occasions, stated they simply don't have enough weapons to both fend off Russian attacks and launch counterstrikes of their own. This is a particularly large problem at the moment, with the Kremlin upping the ante in its drone strikes and sending record levels of drones and missiles over the border to targets all over Ukraine in recent weeks and months. July, for example, saw a staggering 6,297 Russian drone strikes, and Moscow has also ordered numerous frontline assaults in areas like Donetsk, Kherson and Zaporizhia, sending scores of soldiers, along with some tanks and armoured vehicles, to capture little pieces of Ukrainian land bit by bit. Now, more than ever, Ukraine's armed forces need all the weapons they can get, and while shipments are still on the way from NATO allies, Kyiv also has to increase production of its own armament like the Long Neptune. Since this missile is 100% Ukrainian-made, Kyiv doesn't have to worry about shipments being delayed or random rules being imposed about how, where and when the missile can be fired. It can do what it wants, and as long as it has the necessary budget and resources, it can produce these missiles in significant quantities, firing them as and when it chooses at whichever targets it deems necessary. This emboldens and empowers Ukraine to entirely new levels. It undoubtedly boosts morale across the Ukrainian ranks as soldiers see the Long Neptune in action and witness the massive damage it can deal to their enemies. The general public too will see this as a major milestone for Ukraine's military innovation, another sign and symbol of the country's remarkable resilience and its ability to dig in and face adversity head-on, creating new solutions to the problems and pressures imposed upon it. All in all, the Long Neptune effectively embodies the power and spirit of Ukraine, and it serves as yet another example of how well the country has adapted to the conflict and how it's rapidly emerged as a major military force, producing the kinds of weapons and systems that even major warfaring nations would struggle to match. Don't forget, after all, that, as well as the Long Neptunes, Ukraine has also made numerous other domestic missiles in recent years, as well as low-cost kamikaze drones, cutting-edge maritime drones, sci-fi-style AI-powered turrets, game-changing static barriers, and countless other exciting, extraordinary innovations to defend its territory, attack its enemy, and change the face of modern warfare as it's known today. From a value perspective too, the Long Neptune changes the game for Ukraine. No specifics have been released about how much each one will cost, but standard Neptune missiles are said to cost around $1.5 million each. Long Neptunes undoubtedly have a higher price tag, but even if they cost twice or even 5 times as much as the standard variants, that wouldn't matter all that much, because each one has the power to deal hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars in damage if it hits the right targets, like expensive Russian radar stations, air defense complexes, or high-end bomber planes. Thanks to that, as long as Ukraine continues to plan its attacks with care, it should be able to extract tons of value from every single missile fired. This in turn could put Russia on the back foot. Suddenly, instead of dedicating all its time and energy to frontline offensives and nightly drone strikes, the Kremlin's commanders will need to rethink their tactics to cope with the threat of Ukrainian long-range missile strikes. They might have to, for example, bring high-value assets like tanks, fighter jets, radars and air defences further back from the front lines, deeper inland, where they'll be safer but less useful from a military perspective. Russia may also have to increase its defences around its most valuable pieces of infrastructure, like the aforementioned refineries and production plants that are within range of a Long Neptune strike. This will all waste more time, money, manpower and resources, slowing Russia's progress even more and giving it numerous new problems to solve and headaches to suffer. The best part of all of this is that all of the benefits mentioned throughout this video are not hypothetical. They're not examples of things that might happen at some stage in the future. They're already happening at this very moment. Because even though the Long Neptune was only just publicly unveiled for the first time, it's been in use for several months already, as Zelenskyy himself has confirmed. It's battle-tested, combat-proven, and has already dealt millions of dollars worth of damage to Russia, hitting targets like the Akasino oil pumping station and the Tuapse oil refinery back in March, and perhaps other locations in the intervening months. And with Ukraine massively improving its missile mass production capacity over the course of 2024 and into 2025, there's no telling how many Long Neptunes Kyiv could make and fire in the coming weeks and months. But one thing is certain, the Kremlin should be very concerned. Now, learn more about Ukraine's amazing military innovations in our recent look at Kyiv's jet-powered ghost-in-the-sky stealth drones, or check out how American next-generation guided missiles are set to change the face of the front lines like never before. And finally, make sure to subscribe to our trusted channel too, so you can stay informed and up to date on all the latest developments from the Russia-Ukraine conflict and other military matters around the world.